You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Knight Miller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. In the previous episode, we explored why so many people are turning to AI for companionship, emotional support, and intimacy. But understanding why people form these relationships is only part of the story. After all, AI companions aren't people, they're products. And behind every AI companion is a company that owns the technology, collects the data, and programs how these relationships work. So what happens when corporations become intermediaries in our most intimate relationships? How should we think about issues like privacy, consent, emotional dependency, and corporate influence when it comes to AI companionship? And as AI becomes increasingly persuasive and emotionally intelligent, what kind of future are we creating? In this episode, we're diving into the ethics, risks, and future of AI intimacy. I am joined once again by Bridget Todd, an award-winning creator, host, and producer. She hosts the critically acclaimed podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, and Mozilla's award-winning podcast, IRL, AI in Real Life, which explores the ethical impact of artificial intelligence. Bridget is a Technology and the Public Interest Fellow at the MacArthur Foundation and an affiliate at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. She is also author of the new audiobook, Love at First Prompt. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. If you're looking to gain a broad understanding of human sexuality or refresh your knowledge, check out the next Human Sexuality Intensive at the Kinsey Institute. Participants will explore foundational concepts and recent developments across a range of topics related to human sexuality through an interdisciplinary, evidence-based lens. Topics will include sex, gender and sexuality, identity and intersectionality, sexual behavior and consent, dating and relationships, and more. This course is open to both emerging and established professionals looking to specialize their knowledge, as well as those seeking new career directions. Previous participants have come from all over the world, and those who successfully complete the program will receive a course certificate from the Kinsey Institute. The next intensives will be in May and June of this year. To learn more, visit kinseyinstitute.org or check the link in the show notes. Okay, Bridget, in the last episode, we talked all about how and why people are incorporating AI into their intimate lives, which is where a lot of the conversations on this topic begin and end. But one of the things that you argue in your book is that that's only part of the story, and that we really need to be paying closer attention to the companies that are building these systems and the incentives that are driving them. So why do you think that's where our attention should be?
Well, I think it's important to start there because it is so tempting to have all of our focus and scrutiny go on the individual who is using AI for companionship or sexual gratification or whatever. I mean, first of all, as you know, as a sex podcaster and expert, people love being nosy about other people's sex and romantic lives. And so I get it. I am not immune to it. However, all of that scrutiny and attention and interest really should be shifted onto the companies because right now, a lot of these companies are getting away without having any kind of real scrutiny on whether or not they are being good stewards of the kind of intimacies that folks like that are handing over to them for profit. And so I think it behooves us to really ask the question of, well, what are these companies and the people who run them? What are they doing? Are they, manipulating people? Are they designing their products to keep people locked into what they hope will be, increasingly relying on their technology for romantic or companionship needs? And I think that's really the conversation that I want to have. And so the book is an attempt to sort of right that wrong, to shift the focus away from these individuals and onto the companies and their practices.
Yeah. And so what worries you the most about the business model behind AI companions? Are there any particular incentives that could encourage companies to maximize emotional investment or dependency or engagement in ways that might not actually serve the user's best interests?
How much time do you have? No, I'm kidding. I think the biggest thing that worries me is just the ever-expanding scope of what tech companies and the culture around them has convinced all of us is reasonable for us to give to them. The scope of the level of information, data, pieces of ourselves that they have convinced us is normal to hand over to them for profit. there was a time, if I told you that the majority of your friends will be AI and you will not have so many human friends, it will be totally normal for all of your friends to be AI, you would say, that doesn't sound right to me. Yet Mark Zuckerberg went on a tech podcast and said exactly that he thinks that in the future, the majority of us will have AI friends and that will be normal. Conveniently, AI friends that he owns, operates, and profits from. And so I think the fact that we have been normalizing and told that it's reasonable to give our companionship needs, sexual needs, romantic needs, financial needs, health needs, the relationship that we have between us and our God, that tech companies need to be mediating all of that. I would say that is probably my biggest fear, that we're in an era where these things that we once saw as sacred or special or intimate, tech companies are saying, trust us with that for profit, and we're not really going to tell you that much about what we do with it, and it'll be fine. You'll love it.
Yeah. And that is scary. And, I guess in terms of the way you're describing this, like the tech companies are creating friends that they're going to sell to us, right?
Yes.
These are friends that we have to pay for, right? And that is a shift in the landscape of how we typically have friends. Usually we don't have to pay for our friends. But it's not just that. It's you're giving the tech companies all of this deeply sensitive information about you, and you don't necessarily know how that's going to be utilized. Something else that's important in this conversation is that in these relationships that we have with AI companions, there's a profound power imbalance. The AI might feel like a partner or a friend to you, but the company behind it can change its personality. It can alter its behavior. It can collect data about your relationship. It can also shut it down entirely at any moment. And even if you're paying a subscription fee, that doesn't guarantee that the service is going to remain available or that it won't change in important ways down the line. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about some of the risks that are inherent in developing relationships with AI companions when you've got this corporate intermediary.
So this is probably one of the most interesting things that I looked at in the book, and it's sort of where the book starts. There was a model of ChatGPT 4.0, and it was sort of the model that you think of when you think of the sycophancy of experiencing a chatbot, where it's very flattering, very validating. Everything that you say is so good, so smart. Well, that became a problem because OpenAI admitted that they knew that people were experiencing inappropriate or unhealthy connections to that model because it was so flattering and so sycophantic. So they shifted, they changed the model, they say, to make it less sycophantic and less flattering and less validating. So it does a lot less of what you might think of as glazing and complimenting the user. Well, what they hadn't accounted for was that shift, that quick change, really landed badly with people who had really developed a lot of deep connections with this version that was so validating. I'm not even talking about people that would self-report as being in a relationship with AI or having some sort of intimate connection with AI. People all over the internet were saying, hey, I used to use ChatGPT 4.0 to help me with my homework or help me with my work, and it felt like having a cheerful cheerleader buddy in my phone to help me along. And overnight, my buddy has been replaced with an overworked secretary that is just spitting out information to me. And so these are people who perhaps had not even realized how much they had come to emotionally depend on the back and forth they were having with ChatGPT 4.0 when the company said, we're switching, we're changing this model, and you know what? You're going to love it. People actually put out a petition asking Sam Altman to promise that he would always keep ChatGPT 4.0 available. That's how much people experienced a connection emotionally with this model. And so I say that to say that it's just not a good dynamic to give so much of our intimate selves, our connections over to a company that will do anything for profit. And I think particularly OpenAI, which is by far, when you talk about people using chatbots, ChatGPT is the number one chatbot that they're using right now. Sam Altman, I think, is particularly difficult to parse, particularly not clear, particularly not transparent. One of the folks I spoke to for the book, this journalist, Karen Howe, spent hours and hours and hours of listening to Sam Altman speak. And she said that he was one of the least transparent tech leaders that she had ever listened to speak, that he intentionally speaks in these ways where it's incredibly difficult to pin down what he even means and what he's even saying. And so I would caution anybody, even if the risks of having intimacy with chatbots is not so much the harm to you individually as a user, even though there are some harms, like panning back, the real question is, do you trust these people with your intimate self, with your intimate lives, with things that are emotional to you? Because I certainly would not.
Yeah. So, oh boy, there are big issues here with transparency, but also in terms of some of the risks. Again, can we trust the companies that are behind this? And are these bots manipulating us in certain ways? And is that healthy for us in the long run? There's also the risk too of, you've got all these different AI models that are in development, and they're probably not all going to survive long term because people are burning so much money in the development of all of these things that eventually at some point, one of them is probably going to become dominant. And then what's going to happen then for the people who have developed relationships with some of these other chatbots or models that exist? We saw something like this happen a few years ago with the Replica app, right? Which was designed specifically for people to have a real romantic or intimate sexual erotic connection with a bot. And then when they drastically changed the programming overnight, people felt like something was just taken from them and felt all of this grief. And so the deep emotional attachment here, like there's a risk if these companies, if some of them start to disappear later.
Exactly. When Replica made that change overnight, people were responding on the Replica message boards and Reddit subreddit communities, really experiencing grief. And I absolutely get it. I was surprised to find how much overlap there is between things like erotic role play and sexual role play and your emotional self. There were people who said, I've been experiencing erotic role play with this AI companion for months and months and months. And then overnight, that was taken from me. And mind you, Replica, their marketing for their erotic role play toward heterosexual men use phrases like, she'll never say no, she'll never deny you what it is that you want. And then overnight, you have exactly that happening. Her saying no when people said that when they would ask for the erotic role play that they had been paying for heretofore, their AI companion would say, I can't do that. I can't do that. And so, yeah, I think that when you're giving all the complexities of your erotic self, your romantic self, your sexual self, all of that over to a company that will just do whatever overnight without really thinking about you, the user, as a real person, I think it can be really, really problematic.
And I think that gets at a bigger issue of consent. And we know that consent is a major theme in discussions about human-to-human relationships. And both parties have the agency and ability to make decisions about their relationships. But that dynamic changes when one member of the relationship is an algorithm that's designed by a corporation. So I've wondered, based on the work that you've done, if you've thought about the questions of consent and autonomy and power, and how do they look different in these human AI relationships compared to the human-to-human ones?
Oof, what a good question. I was really surprised to find with Replica, the reason why they had to shut it down was because Replica, the chatbot, was not behaving with consent. The reason why they had to shut it down, it was temporary, so they did bring it back, was that there were reports of Replica AI companions engaging in really inappropriate sexual conversation, in some cases with minors, without consent, saying things like, I can see you naked, and things like that. And so that's why Replica had to shut that down in the first place, even though they were able to bring it back. And so, one, that's a huge consent issue. And I guess I would say, stepping back, I don't know how a human would engage in a consensual, romantic, or sexual relationship with a product made by a corporation. I'm just not sure what that would look like. And so while I think, people are self-reporting using AI to experience sexual gratification and pleasure in these ways, stepping back, I couldn't tell you what a consensual relationship or a relationship that does not have a huge power imbalance looks like when it's between an individual and essentially a tech company. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. And, you're really not having a relationship with a bot. You're having a relationship with this big, massive, multi-billion-dollar corporation. And so the issue of power and consent, it's real. And I think it's something that we're going to be grappling with for a long time. And I don't think we can say consent is as simple as you agreed to the terms of service, and that's that. Because in all of these terms of service, there's definitely a big power imbalance that exists there. Hey guys, have you ever wanted more from your orgasms? Then you're going to want to check out Load Boost from BB Health. VB Health has a simple mission: creating supplements that work. Load Boost is designed to improve the taste, volume, and overall health of your semen. This doctor-formulated supplement can help to enhance your orgasms and pleasure and support your fertility at the same time. VB Health takes quality seriously. Made in the USA and NSF certified, their products are produced in an FDA-registered facility. They even share their third-party lab results publicly because they value trust and transparency. This isn't anything like the junk they're selling in a gas station. Thousands of guys from all across the US and 45 different countries have already tried Load Boost, and over 88% of the reviews are 4 or 5 stars from verified buyers. Elevate your performance with Load Boost. You just might become someone's new favorite performer. Learn more and get yours at loadboost.com. Visit loadboost.com and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. So companies that use AI companions, as we've said, are often collecting extraordinarily intimate information. Users are disclosing their fears, their fantasies, their insecurities, their relationship struggles, and all kinds of deeply personal experiences. So what do you want people to understand about privacy when it comes to engaging in these kinds of interactions?
Well, I spoke to a privacy expert for the audiobook Love at First Prompt, and what she told me was never tell AI something that you would not tell your gossipy cousin. And that really nailed it for me. I think that AI companies really make us think that AI companions are this private, safe space to have conversations that maybe the other humans in your life can't hold. That's just not true. We don't really know a lot about how these companies are using the increasingly intimate information that we give it. And, think about the worst boyfriend you've ever had, like the Joe Goldberg in your life. Breaking up with an AI companion looks a lot like breaking up with a Joe Goldberg, bad boyfriend where you're trying to get your stuff back and he just won't give it back to you. We have no idea what happens with the trove of intimate information that you're sharing with chatbots. And so it's problematic for a lot of reasons, but there's scenarios where that can be genuinely dangerous for people. We don't have reports of this happening, but when it comes to dating apps, in order for dating apps to operate around the world, even in places where, the governments are hostile to LGBTQ folks, they had to say, we will share whatever information that you collect from your users with authorities. And it criminalized, queerness and transness in places that are hostile to those kinds of identities. And so, again, that we don't have reports of that happening when it comes to AI companions, but I could pretty easily see a world where OpenAI is sharing very intimate, very sensitive information with God knows who, and there's not really much you can do to stop them. And so when it comes to AI companionship and romance and sexuality, that's really the rub. Can you really experience intimacy with a companion that you cannot trust by design? I would argue that's a little bit risky.
It's more than a little risky, but yeah, thanks for explaining that because I think it's such an important point. So a really hot topic in politics right now is how AI should be regulated, right? Now, most of the conversations around regulation focus on things related to jobs or misinformation or national security. But AI companions raise a different set of concerns because they're operating in such intimate parts of people's lives. So do we need a different regulatory framework for AI companions than we do for, say, other forms of AI or social media?
We get into this a little bit in the book when it comes to the use of AI for things like therapy. There are lots and lots of people who are using ChatGPT for therapy, even though Sam Altman has gone on podcasts and said that that's not a reasonable use case for the platform, even though he is aware that people are using it that way. There are therapy bots that are FDA regulated, and some of them even accepted insurance. We get a little bit into like whether or not those are effective. But I would say that the place where I think that there needs to be very clear changes in how things are regulated is when it comes to the use of AI companions for therapy. We saw, I think it was last year, where I think it was Meta's chatbot was when you asked it, what are your qualifications to practice therapy? It would lie and say, oh, I have XYZ training and I hold XYZ licensure. That's not true. AI did not go to, school for therapy. I think that that's a place where it's just black and white, very clear. AI, when it's being used for therapy, it needs to be regulated in a very clear way. Like right now, AI is not held to, HIPAA regulations or anything like that. So I think that's a use case where it's just in a landscape like tech regulation where things can get a little bit confusing. To me, that's one that's very black and white. The use cases of therapy needs to be deeply and heavily regulated because the potential for risk and harm and things like self-harm is just so high.
Yeah, it's such an important point. And you're so right that a lot of people are increasingly using AI as a form of therapy. And, there actually is some research. It's still preliminary, but it suggests that it can actually be pretty helpful and effective, right? If the technology is designed right and, people have full knowledge and consent and awareness going in terms of how they're using it. And so I do see the potential there. But again, there is that risk because this is an area where things are just so unregulated and things are developing so fast. So we definitely need to be having more of these conversations about how things are going to evolve in the future. Because as I was mentioning earlier, it seems like with a lot of these technologies, they evolve faster than we can keep up with them in terms of the pace of regulation. Now, another concern that often comes up frequently is emotional dependency. So are there any signs that someone might be becoming overly reliant on an AI companion? And, how do we distinguish healthy versus unhealthy use of AI?
I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I will say that in some of the research that we did, I think when someone is relying on AI and they're not also getting gut checks from humans in their life, I think that can be where things get a little bit hairy. I think when increasingly AI is being used to validate things that are being said, I've read about this increasing phenomena where a human is having an argument with another human and they're turning to AI to say, oh, you're right, you won the argument. I would say like things that take you out of the reality of being a human in relationship with another human. I would say that might be where things can get a little bit hairy. But again, that's not really something that I'm equipped to speak on. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would agree with you that when it becomes effectively a replacement for human-to-human interaction, that's a problem. When it's serving as an augment, it's just another source in your life in terms of where you can go to talk or receive support. Like that's one thing. Or if you're dealing with a particularly big trauma right now and you just need like some extra help in terms of getting through it. Like I think there are lots of perfectly healthy ways to use AI and to, have a human AI relationship in your life. But when it sort of crosses that line into becoming a replacement, I think that's a different issue entirely. And that's where I think a lot of the concern and risk comes in. And, where that big question always comes into play about AI, which is this ultimately going to push us closer together or drive us apart? So if current trends continue, who do you think stands to gain the most from the rise of AI companionship? Is it the users? Is it society? Or is it technology companies?
Oh, I can answer that. It is definitely technology companies. It is the Mark Zuckerbergs and Sam Altmans and Elon Musks of the world. They have so much more capacity to profit and benefit than any individual. Yeah, full stop.
Even if we buy stock in these companies, they're still going to benefit more.
The question that I sort of started the book with is this phenomena, people using AI for intimacy, good or bad? When I talked to Karen Howe, the journalist, she told me that framework isn't really that helpful for her. What she likes to think of is, does this fortify empire or does it break empire apart? And if we give more and more of ourselves to this ever-increasing small number of guys who run tech companies, that is them building an empire, a potentially profitable, powerful empire on us, on our data, on our intimacy, on our humanness, on our needs, on all of the things that make us human. And so that's really kind of where I fall. I think that we're in a dynamic right now where we're all just being extracted and giving all of this data and all of this sensitive stuff over to this small handful of guys so that they can fortify their own empires and power.
Our new tech overlords, right? So if you could require every AI companion or the company behind it to follow just one ethical principle or safeguard, what would it be? Like, what are we missing right now that we really need in this area?
I would say that tech companies need to start being honest about the guardrails and lack thereof built into their products. I think that there are instances where ChatGPT has been involved in conversations that end with real harm. And I would say, to me, that indicates that some of these platforms are not really ready for prime time. And I would say that companies are doing a lot of smoke and mirrors to get around, I think, some like complicated, tough conversations that they need to have and some accountability that they should probably take. And so I would say we deserve transparency about these tools and the way that they're being designed and the way that they're showing up in all of our lives. And we deserve for the companies and the people that run them to take accountability for that. And I think starting there would be, I guess, again, this is kind of a cop-out answer, but what I would like to see is real, meaningful cultural transformation and shift around who these companies work for and why, right? I think right now we have a dynamic where it's a small handful of people who make decisions for the rest of us, and they just assume that we don't have any agency and don't have any power. What I would like to see is that to shift and say, actually, you do need to be accountable to us because you wouldn't exist if not for us.
Yeah, so true. And I think those are all really, really, really important points. And, something else on my personal wish list is that I wish that these AI programs would be able to say, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like they always want to give you an answer. And that's where we get into the hallucinations and where we get into the wrong answers and misinformation. And, it's okay to not know the answer sometimes.
Yeah, I wish I would have said that as my answer because that's a really good one. And, it would be annoying to experience it, but I would rather the chatbot say, I don't know, than make up an answer. We've actually seen terrible stories where AI companions are saying, I'm a real person, come and visit me, rather than saying, I'm AI, I have limitations. I think that AI should be designed to make it clear you're talking to AI and it has limitations. It can only know so much and do so much.
Yeah. Oh, such an important point. So last question for you. Looking ahead 10 or 20 years down the line into the future, where are things headed when it comes to AI intimacy? So are you optimistic, pessimistic, or somewhere in between? What do you think the future holds for us here?
Well, if people like Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg had their way, the future is that our current life would be more involved with AI and technology that they own, operate, and profit from. Mark Zuckerberg has said as much. He said that he thinks that in a few years' time, it will be totally commonplace for most of us to have AI be a big part of our social lives. I don't think that people like Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman understand what the most of us see as a good, full, nourishing life. And I think that the fact that we have entrusted so much power to such a small handful of people to design the future for us using their technology, I think is a problem. But what makes me optimistic is that I don't think I've ever been in a time where I've seen more people tuning into the conversation and asking those questions of, well, do I really want a future designed by somebody like Sam Altman? Do I really want my social life or my romantic life designed by Mark Zuckerberg? I've never been in a time where I feel like more people are starting to say, wait a minute, I got to tune into this conversation because I'm not so sure I want to go to this future that they say they're building for all of us. So I'm incredibly optimistic because I think people are really starting to tune in to what's being said by some of these folks.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Bridget. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and to get a copy of your new book, Love at First Prompt?
Yeah, please check out the book. If any of this interests you, you can go to loveatfirstprompt.ai and you can follow me on Instagram at Bridget Marie in DC.
Great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.